And so with that, I want to pass it to Guy Fagap, World Beyond War's Africa organizer, to introduce this next session.
Thank you,
Vamos,
Greta. Welcome to everyone. Apologies, I'm
welcome,
a bit in
bienvenidos
the
a
dark,
todos.
but I still can see me anyway. So I'm Guy Fegab, the Africa organizer for World Beyond War. I'm based in Cameroon, in Yaoundé precisely. And I'm honored to welcome Rim, with whom I have the pleasure to work in the past on the global project to mobilize men for feminist peace. So Rim will be our moderator for the panel on case studies of abolition. So Rim Abbas is a Sudanese writer, journalist, and feminist activist. She's part of the women's movement in Sudan as a former member of the coordination committee at Sudanese women in civic and political groups. She hosted the Mobilizing Men for Feminist Peace postcards at Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and she's the co-author of Undoing Resistance, Authoritarianism, and Attacks on the Arts in Sudan's 30 Years of Islamic Rule. So welcome, Rim. The floor is here to lead the, session, the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's very nice to come back to World Beyond War. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Greta. And thank you, Elle, for your powerful words. My name is Reem. I am from Sudan. We are here in Sudan as it continues to be ravaged by war. We were always in a chronic state of war, but a widespread civil war broke out in April 2023 between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, a paramilitary force. After a month of putting my daughter under the bed and feeling that our home shook every time warplanes circled an area near us, we fled. We fled our home with nothing but hopes to return soon. And I was only able to return home after almost 2 years. So the first time I returned home after fleeing in May 2023 was in September 2025. Everything was looted. Part of our home was destroyed. I found some pictures from a photo album at the door, next to the door. And I can assure you that when a war changes you, I am not the same person. War leaves its marks, but it also helps you understand the importance of peace. I miss just the very simple routine of seeing my neighbors, of being home, of enjoying being with my family, all of it. A world beyond war. Sadly, war continues to be the daily reality for many of us all over the world. And if there's no war, lives continue to be upended by communal violence and state-sponsored violence and brutality. In 2014, the leader of the RSF, the paramilitary force I told you about, said something very interesting. He said that if you don't have a gun, you don't have an opinion. As much as this sounds ridiculous, this is a perfect example of how living in a militarized marketplace, political marketplace, if I may say, continues to make us feel helpless. Do we need a gun to have an opinion? Isn't our voice enough? Many times we feel helpless, but today we are not helpless. Today we are collectively challenging this militarization and we're fighting back with words, with solidarity and small actions. I believe that one day we will win. I can assure you of that. In some countries, people have won or are winning every day through small actions against militarization. Today, I'm very happy to moderate and listen to activists and scholar activists who worked in different contexts to challenge and or dismantle the military-industrial complex. Our speakers are Shirley Gunn, Executive Director of the South African Coalition for Transitional Justice, Jorge Barrientos, a Professor and Associate Researcher of Contemporary History at the University of Costa Rica, who will speak about how Costa Rica abolished its army, Emilia Kirby, she's the Director of the Sycamore Project, an initiative of the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky, focused on reducing reliance on the prison industrial complex. So before we hear from Shirley Gunn, you can use the Q&A box during the webinar. We're very happy to go through your questions and we will try our best. So Shirley, I'm very, very happy to just listen to you and also for you to share your knowledge, your experience with the participants. So in 1990, And I remember this because I watched a documentary about Mandela, and it talked about this very difficult period in South Africa. In 1990, South Africa was on the verge of war. But then it moved to a transition that continues to inspire many around the world. How do you make sacrifices when militarization is so high? Shirley, you're mute, so I think you have to unmute yourself. Sorry. Thank you.
1990, South Africa was not on the verge of war. It had been centuries of war, and we were on the verge of negotiating peace. But there were left, the right forces that were against this happening. So I need to go back a little bit to those centuries. South Africa had three colonial powers, the Netherlands from 1652 to 1795, and then Great Britain from 1795 to 1803, and then there's a hiatus for 3 years, and then from 1803 to 1961. So both the Netherlands and the British had colonized South Africa violently. People were annihilated, land was stolen, and cultural artifacts stolen, and people were robbed of their heritage and their identity. So then came apartheid was ushered in 1948, still with the British in control. And in 1960 to 1994, it was the 1990, beg your pardon, the Apartheid Nationalist Party was in power, and it was violent. It was horrifically violent. And, there were very many conscious human beings who rose up and fought brilliantly against the system. The end conscription campaign that mobilized to oppose forced conscription on white men who were just out of school, 18 years of age, young, before they even went to university, before they knew who they were and what they wanted to do with their lives. And that movement was very, very successful. And the mass mobilization across the country was the most important pillar. Our international solidarity was really, really important. However, our liberation struggle was also important. And, having been part of it myself and having gone through the process of thinking through the meaning of a just war, myself and others committed their lives to bringing an end to apartheid. And in 1990, our Mandela, at great risk, in fact, he was negotiating behind the scenes with, you can say, the enemy, with the Nationalist Party, and the Rivonia trialists with him, the leadership of the ANC, were quite suspicious of this process. But we are very grateful that it got to a point of a good outcome. Although that period, 1990 to 94, there was some aspects of the negotiation that were behind closed doors, and we don't really know what was agreed to. So what we do understand post 1994 is that we've got the most fantastic constitution where the judiciary and the army and the police are separate from the state, where everyone knows their place in society, everyone is equal. Apartheid is totally and utterly outlawed. We've got international laws that support our movement, the anti-apartheid movement from 1960. The UN General Assembly passed the resolution declaring apartheid a crime against humanity. 1973, the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid was adopted. And then in 1988, the Rome Statute also included apartheid in its statute. So we've got international mechanism in place. However, we can't sit back. I think anyone who has gone through the long process of a freedom struggle cannot depend on mechanisms to work, because they're not. Elle put that in her poetry so clearly. We've had outcomes in the International Criminal Court against Israel, yet Israel has continued with its war machinery funded by the US in the massive arms sales. So I think another important aspect of our transition has been that, all people in security forces were demobilized, from the old SADF to the police to the Navy. Nobody had rank. And then there was a reintegration process, including the non-statutory forces, and a new ranking of the order, and a new kind of philosophy and value system that was imprinted into the military. The arms corps industry that was always manufacturing arms to defend apartheid, to uphold apartheid, merged with another company called Donnell, and one is more in procurement, the other one is more on the manufacturing side. But there's greater accountability now than there ever was before. That's really important in the arms trade. That needs to be defended and fought for. And you see, as I was introduced, I'm the executive director of the South African Coalition for Transitional Justice. Let me remind everybody that the AU has declared 2025 to 2035 the year of reparations for colonialism and slavery. And, I think we have to deal with the past. We can't end something when we haven't dealt with the past. And we can do that non-violently. I've seen how scarred and battle-worn and tragically demoralized people are who took up arms to fight the oppressive system, or to defend the oppressive system. Either way, it has terrible consequences on humankind, and we must stop this. So I think if we are, one of our main pillars in the work of transitional justice is never again. We've got to strengthen the mechanisms that hold accountable countries for the atrocities that they continue to commit. We should rally behind that. We should rally behind the manufacturing of arms and its distribution and its capitalist intent. We should support the disinvestment. We shouldn't trade with companies that are having anything to do with war and conflict. And that we should defend the right to anyone who doesn't want to serve in the army. It should never be enforced anywhere in the world. And I believe in some countries it is still enforced. So I think this is maybe for me an opening chapter of making a connection with my African comrades around here, to including you, Reem, to maybe consolidate a movement on this continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shirley, for talking to us about your transition and what you did, and also that it's a process, it's an ongoing process that you still think about. So I want to move to Jorge Barrientos, our next speaker from Costa Rica, who has a lot to share, and we're all very interested in the Costa Rican example. In 1949, Costa Rica abolished its army. We want to ask you, by abolishing the army, Costa Rica has funded a lot of social programs. Can you help us reflect on this experience and also the identity of people in Costa Rica, as they live in a country that doesn't have this militarization that we see in other countries? And also in an increasingly militarized world, is there an internal pushback in Costa Rica against not having an army, and how do you deal with it? And what are the different arguments that you put towards making sure that Costa Rica continues to be this peaceful nation it is?
Hello, hola, hola. Ok, está bien hablar en español, no problema.
It is good for me to speak in Spanish.
Okay.
Okay.
Bueno, básicamente en
Basically,
Costa Rica, yo, bueno, soy profesor de
in
historia
Costa Rica,
local
I'm
de
a
Costa
history
Rica
professor,
y en resumen,
and in
en
resume,
Costa Rica en
in Costa
1948
Rica in
hubo una
1948,
guerra civil, a civil war, ¿verdad? Una
there
guerra
was a
civil
civil
en Costa
war
Rica entre fuerzas
between the
socialistas
forces of socialism.
que hacían unas reformas sociales muy importantes
They were doing some
y
great reforms,
otro movimiento que era
very important,
socialdemócrata.
and
Una
other
figura histórica
democratic
muy importante en nuestro
social
país se
movement.
llama
There
José
was
Ramírez
another
Ferrer,
historical
quien fue el que hizo
figure
la
in our
abolición del
group
ejército.
with
En realidad,
what they do
la
with the
abolición del
government's
ejército
military army.
responde justamente a
And this
la necesidad en
responds
Costa Rica
to
de evitar más
the
golpes de
need
Estado, más guerras civiles. De
to
manera tal
stop
que,
wars and civil
bueno, en
wars.
1948, después de la
But
guerra
in
civil,
1948, the Civil War,
encontramos una serie de reformas
we
políticas,
found
reformas
some
sociales del
reforms,
gobierno de Figueres Ferrer.
social reforms
Y Figueres Ferrer hace reformas sociales muy
that
importantes. Bueno, dar por
Figuera,
ejemplo, el voto femenino es una
for
reforma
example,
social de
the
Figueres Ferrer,
female
producto
vote
de muchas luchas sociales de
was
las
a
mujeres
social
en la
reform
historia de Costa Rica que
in the
lucharon
history
por
of
la ciudadanía y
Costa
por el
Rica.
voto femenino.
They got in
También
the society for
hizo
the
la
female
abolición del
vote,
ejército y,
and then
bueno, la
he
idea
did the
principal
abolition of the
era que con
government.
el dinero que va al ejército y a la estructura
But the main
militar,
idea was to
pues
take the money that
en
was
Costa
entering
Rica
to the government,
utilizáramos el dinero para
and that we use that money
mejorar el sistema educativo,
to improve
mejorar la educación.
the educational system.
Entonces, en Costa Rica,
Then in Costa
después
Rica,
de 1948, bueno,
after
no
1948,
volvimos a tener más guerras civiles, no dictaduras
the civil war stopped.
militares,
No
no han habido más golpes de Estado. Hay una tradición,
no more
una tradición
military
democrática
strikes,
por 75 años ya,
and
un
this
poco más de
democratic
75 años.
tradition, more than
77 años de
75
tradición
years.
democrática. Sin embargo,
But
también,
nevertheless,
bueno, no tenemos
also,
violencia política, pero Costa
we
Rica
didn't have
tiene
any political
ahora problemas
violence,
de violencia social muy
but now we
importantes.
have many social problems
Costa Rica
with
tuvo
social violence.
una época de reformas
And in Costa
sociales y
Rica,
políticas
there
muy
was a
positivas,
time
muy progresistas.
where there were many
Políticas
reforms,
progresistas
social
entre
reforms, and political
1940
reforms, very
y
positive, very
1980,
progressive,
pero después de
between 1940
1980,
and
Costa Rica es
1980s.
muy dependiente, depende mucho a su economía de
But
Estados
then in
Unidos.
Costa Rica, by then,
Ronald Reagan,
they
eh,
depended
Ronald Reagan
economically from the
impuso
United States
sobre
because Ronald
Centroamérica y
Reagan
América Latina
imposed
reformas
over Central
neoconservadoras,
American, Latin American,
neoliberales, neoconservadoras,
not conservative
neoconservadoras.
reforms,
Y
neoliberalism,
pues Costa Rica
neoconservative.
tiene ahora también muchos problemas
And
de
now in Costa
desigualdad
Rica,
social,
we
muy
have
fuerte desigualdad
a
social,
disparity on
problemas de
social
altos índices de injusticia
with
económica,
high
pobreza,
injustice indices,
tenemos
economic
problemas
poorness,
de mucha violencia social,
too many violence, and these neoliberal reforms with the new model, very capitalist, new conservative, generated many social problems in Costa Rica. And now we need more from this politics and reforms. And in Costa Rica, the other thing that is important is that Costa Rica has a tradition, stabilist tradition, against the war, against the conflicts, in the international conflicts. For example, in the 70s, it was very strong with the process against Vietnam and with the wars in Vietnam. They took around 8 years in the country to end those Central American wars, like in Nicaragua, the revolutions in Salvador, Guatemala. And Costa Rica had a very major role to achieve this in Central America. Around 1986 and 1990 to finish the Civil War. And Ronald Reagan sent too many guns, money to the extreme right movements, as they intended to fight for the peace and the justice within Central America. There was another movement that was very important against the war in Iraq. United States invaded in Iraq in 2013. There built social movements beyond against the invasions with the United States and Iraq. Then Costa Rica has this tradition of saying no to the war and ending this ideal of militarism. And also, as Costa Rica is influenced in the war against the Palestinians, has this active politism strong in Palestine against the Palestinian war. Even what happened with the people in Gaza. And we need more movement across the world joining this against the war in Palestine and in Gaza. They deserve to have a state, they deserve to have a country, to have their peace without fanatism, without radicalism. But this civilist tradition has worked in Costa Rica to build this idea looking for peace and develop a good health system, educational system, with the social services system is working, and do not use the money for guns or for these armies, but to use this money on educational systems, universities, schools. I believe that it's very important to our country to understand that now is very relevant that more education, less guns, more education, less violence. But in the actuality, Costa Rica is facing a problem with the narco traffic from other countries. They're taking too much the domination from Costa Rica. It's very problematic because in Costa Rica there are too many drugs. And as we do not have an army, we cannot fight this criminal narco traffic bands. And it's a very serious problem. Racist insecurity, And it's a very strong thing now in Costa Rica. We're needing to improve this security. And other side is very important. These panels, these discussions that we're taking, so we can look for a better place, a better society to live in, more democratic, a very politic democratic, very important, that has very good indices in social justice, and to have social peace, not having an army, not having guns, military presence. That is not a guarantee for having peace. But Costa Rica is an example. We do not have an army, we do not have guns, but there's still problems, social problems, violence in the street, violence, social violence. I think that the best way to live in democracy is investing money in education and scholarships to give opportunity to young men to study and to build an idea of what the idea of peace is, to construct socialism, to respect other people, to have principles, values like peace, justice, solidarity, human compassion, human rights, to have respect for the other humans, tolerance to the diversities. And I believe now in Costa Rica, we're trying to construct a better nation. But I believe that it's important now in this planet, thinking that is a little bit wrong because of fanatism, political fanatism, the extreme right taking the power. It's very aggressive. And now in this time, it's very important to construct an ideology, a thought of social peace, social justice, saying no to the wars, and to have a respect for international rights. So the big potents like United States, Russia, Israel, they're in this, submerged in this conflict. And that in my point of view, Russia should leave alone Ukraine. And the Israel that is a military potential, stop the wars with the Palestinians in Gaza. Así como esta comunicación, as this communication, this negotiation, the dialogue, the understanding to construct this process of peace. And in Costa Rica with the United Nations, looking for those ideas of having those ideas of peace. And I believe that that is the most important thing of this. I will only say this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this holistic intervention, just sharing how Costa Rica suffered during a civil war and people had started thinking about, how do you have peace? Sorry, sorry, I think you can hear me now. Thank you for your holistic intervention. By telling us that Costa Rica went through a civil war, and then people learned that they need a dignified life, and social services is a way to have a peaceful nation and to ensure that no other war erupts. But of course, there are challenges, and you talked about the drug problem and some social insecurity. And of course, Costa Rica is not in a vacuum, right? It's impacted by the other conflicts happening in the Central American area, and of course, foreign intervention. So thank you so much for sharing all the different details and letting us know that you're still fighting and you're still fighting to keep this peace. But at the same time, it's a process, and you can always make it better. But the core thing is to ensure that social services are available for the people, and especially education. So with that, I want to go to our third guest.
I'm so sorry for the interruption, but we're not hearing this interpretation into Spanish anymore. It just stopped partway through Reem speaking just now. I just want to make sure we get that back working. Can we do a little test into the Spanish interpretation channel? Yes, it's perfect now. Thank you. Please back to you, Reem.
Wonderful. Okay, so now I want to go to Amelia Kirby, and she's working on reducing reliance on the prison system by addressing the root causes behind incarceration in communities that are mostly, low-income communities. So Amelia, we want to learn a lot from you, of course. You write, you have hosted a radio show, you do a lot of work on injustices in the prison system with a focus on Appalachia, I think a region that in the US that not a lot of people talk about. And this region has one of the highest incarceration rates in the US. Could you tell us about the region and why the rates are very high? And where does the prison industrial complex gain its power in this context? And if you can also tell us about the approach you take when you work on reducing incarceration by addressing the root causes of what's happening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me as part of this this wonderful, important conversation. I can start by setting the context a little bit to your question about Appalachia. I live and work in Harlan County, Kentucky, which is on stolen Cherokee and Shawnee land in the Appalachian Mountains in the United States. The region that I'm from is one of the poorest places in the U.S. And for the last 100+ years, we have experienced massive corporate extraction and exploitation in the form of coal mining. And we've also been the site of really powerful forms of resistance and insurgency in response to that exploitation. So that's kind of, where I'm rooted in the work that I do. And now Appalachia is one of the sites of the highest concentration of imprisonment really on the planet. Put simply, the US is different, is basically no other country in the world uses mass incarceration in the same way that the US does as a form of sort of social control to the extent that we do. We have over 2 million people behind bars in the United States currently and are in a period of expanding the forms of detention and imprisonment related to the rise of an authoritarian state. Within the US, the majority of prisons and jails are built in rural places. And Central Appalachia is the rural area in the US with the highest density of prison and jail construction in the country. Just as we kind of are going into this, a couple of terms I want to clarify. People, I'm sure, are familiar with the prison industrial complex. I'm a prison industrial complex abolitionist. And just to unpack the term prison industrial complex, or PIC, it's used this definition was developed by Critical Resistance, which is one of the kind of pioneering abolitionist organizations in the US. The prison industrial complex is the interdependent relationship between public and private interests that use imprisonment, policing, surveillance, courts, execution, and the cultural elements associated with those to maintain social control and power differences while claiming to provide safety. So that's a kind of very densely interwoven system of power. A prison industrial complex abolitionist, it's a political vision that has the goal of eliminating prisons, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment that disrupt the structural and personal origins of harm while creating systems that offer healing rather than punishment. So I just kind of wanted to bring those two terms into focus a little bit. So in Appalachia, where I live, there's been a concentrated expansion of the prison industrial complex in the last 30 to 40 years. These prisons and jails were all built with the explicit promise that they would serve as economic development for the poor counties and the communities that they were being sited in. And just to kind of layer a piece in, the majority of these institutions were built on the sites of former strip mines, on mountaintop removal sites, which is a form of mining that basically literally takes the tops of the mountains off to access the coal underneath, leaving behind just utter destruction. And so then building prisons on those sites kind of is a very symbolic linking of the environmental and human devastation of both of those systems. And despite the promise that these prisons would provide jobs and economic security for the communities that they're built in. There's a lot of research showing that the counties where prisons opened as economic development have had worse economic outcomes. They've gotten poorer rather than more economically secure as the prisons opened. But in addition to kind of research based, we know from living here that prisons are not improving our communities. We don't have clean drinking water. We still don't have access to adequate health care. We have desperately underfunded schools. We have among the highest overdose rates in the country from drug use. We still have a massive housing crisis. So a big part of the work that we do in countering the narrative of the prison industrial complex as a good project is just making that clear of countering those lies that are being told about the so-called economic benefits of prisons and jails, and much less the solution to harm that's being offered at, imprisonment as an answer to harm. And so emphasizing that when we spend money on imprisonment, that means it's not getting spent on the things that we really desperately need on all these other fronts. So fighting against the PIC is a way that we're fighting for the future of our place, of our communities. And our fight in Appalachia is part of a broad fight against the PIC in general. And I think particularly for the conversations we're having at this conference, the ways that the prison industrial complex reinforces authoritarianism and the global reach of US militarization and imperialism. We know fascism uses xenophobic, racist, misogynist, homophobic notions of a common enemy to build authoritarianism and to protect capitalism. We're in the midst of this terrifying, massive expansion of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency in the US, to kidnap and detain and deport people to prisons like the 30,000 bed CCOT prison in El Salvador. So it's a kind of an international expansion of these forms of containment and imprisonment and punishment, linking authoritarian states across the globe. And that's really a key part of maintaining and enforcing fascism and linking them in international contexts. Similarly, we're seeing the creation in the United States of so-called cop cities, which are training grounds for police forces in militarized policing and repression. And cop cities in the US are collaborating with international efforts around that kind of militarization of police force. So while what is happening in a small town in an isolated part of the United States might feel isolated or or disconnected from this kind of global crises, one of the things I think is important to talk about is how these forces reinforce and intersect each other across scale. What's happening in my small community is being replicated in different scales across enormous landscapes around the world. And we have to reflect on what our individual role, our regions, the different communities that we're coming from, what our role can be in resisting this rising tide of authoritarianism that's expanding very significantly in the US and around the world. So I wanted to just give a couple of examples quickly of that expansion, but then also resistance to that expansion. We have a county in Kentucky, Laurel County, which is quite close to where I live, just in 2020 opened a $24 million mega jail. It has nearly 1,000 beds in a county with a population of around 58,000 people, which means that this tiny Appalachian county has about a third the number of prison beds, jail beds, as the entire New York City system. And they built this massive jail with the very express intent of renting out those beds to the federal government to use for ICE detention. So you have these small municipalities, small communities recognizing that this kind of authoritarian wave is coming and trying to get in on it, essentially, building out both ways to profit locally, but then also just participating in that, the creation of those systems of enforcement. In another county in eastern Kentucky, where I live, literally just over the mountain from where I live, the federal government, the US government, is trying to build a massive prison. It would be the 17th prison in our area. They proposed it in 2022, just a few weeks after there was an enormous, devastating flood that was linked very directly to mining and climate catastrophe, which really caused huge destruction in the region, where dozens of people were killed. And many, many thousands of homes were damaged and destroyed. The estimate to rebuild the housing that was lost in the flood was around $500 million. And 2 months after the flood happened, our congressman, instead of fighting for federal money to rebuild the area, proposed instead the construction of a prison with a price tag of $550 million, almost exactly the amount that we needed to rebuild. So you have the expansion of the mechanism of authoritarianism rather than the investment in the well-being of communities. But the good news on that front is that there's an incredibly powerful coalition that's come together to fight the construction of this prison, and really and imagine a different future for our area. We have a group called Building Community, Not Prisons, and I'll put the link in the chat when I am finished talking. But it's a grassroots coalition of local and national folks who are working to oppose the construction of the prison and also really envision what they call non-carceral alternatives for our communities. Alternatives that don't involve caging people, essentially. People from Appalachia who don't want to link our future to this death-making institution. People who have themselves been locked up in Appalachian prisons are now free and building solidarity with the very places that they were once imprisoned in, recognizing we have to work across those lines of manufactured division. And so we've just recently succeeded in organizing and fundraising to buy a piece of land that is literally in the heart of where the proposed prison is going to sit, like on the land that the prison is supposed to be built on, and have put it in the hands of an indigenous-led organization that's practicing land rematriation. And they're planning on building a habitat for bison there on that site, which were a common species in Appalachia hundreds of years ago that were eliminated through the project of settler colonialism. So we're really working towards fighting the prison industrial complex by building towards a world rooted in equity and possibility. And I'll just quickly say a couple of words about some of the factors that have been important for us in our resistance. And it's really understanding the necessity of building diverse alliances, of working across those manufactured divides, the importance of cultural organizing. We use tools of resistance like building solidarity, making community through food, using song and theater and art to grounding each other, and in the work with each other and in the work against the expansion of the fascist thinking and behaving and infrastructure. So we believe that the argument against carceral expansion has to be made on moral and cultural and economic grounds, to show that the system of locking people up causes more harm than it fixes, and it doesn't do anything to help the economy or address harm in any kind of real way. So we're working to stop prison expansion in Appalachia and to link our struggle with the powerful movements against authoritarianism and militarism happening around the globe. And thank you so much for having me as part of this conversation. I really am genuinely thankful.
Wow, thank you, Amelia. This was great to first learn about this region that many of us don't know a lot about, and to learn about how the community is responding. It was also interesting to hear your the definition you said about the prison industrial complex, and to learn that prisons are actually a very thriving business, as I can see. And yeah, a very thriving business. And also like what you said about how this situation in the US relates. It relates a lot, of course, because it's the US is again exporting, right? This prison industrial complex to other parts. So we're learning from you and we are in solidarity with you. And we're also learning how to look into that. I have to Google what a bison is. We don't have it. So I'm now curious to know how it looks like. So yeah, so now I want to move to the Q&A. You've all sent some great questions. I'm going to try my best to distribute them to the speakers, but also you're free to jump in if you also want to add something. So we have a few questions. So the first question is, so many people work or fight for peace. Thank you. When the world attains peace and gets beyond war, hopefully soon, what will they, what will you, and what will I do? This is a good question. And I think, Amelia, if you can answer it, and also Shirley, if you want to jump in, Jorge, I think all of us, this is an important question for all of us to jump in and answer. So if you want to start, Amelia.
Yeah, that's I think I'm always looking at kind of what are we looking at towards the reduction of harm and the expansion of true well-being and true safety, and it shouldn't be complicated. It should be access to our basic needs, to clean water, to healthcare, to healthy food, to ways of mediating and mitigating conflict that don't rely on violence and punishment.
Oh, you're
Shirley?
muted, Reem.
Yes. Do you have anything to add?
I would say there's not a moment that we have to drop our guard, because the world is dictated to by forces largely beyond our control, economic forces, capitalist forces. And so we've got to keep our guard up. We've got to stay vigilant. And so I think for many of us, it's a lifetime's work, and we pass on the baton to the next generation to continue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great. And keep the questions coming. We have a question to Jorge. Thank you, Jorge. She's saying that the social violence and drug cartels of which you speak, which threaten democratic systems, including Costa Rica, stem from poverty and economic hardship. So if you have any comment on her comment, and this is from Angelique.
Rachel, could you translate that question in Spanish?
Hola Jorge, ¿hay una pregunta para usted o algún comentario? Angelique está diciendo que la violencia social y los cárteles de la droga de lo que usted
Angelique
habló
is saying
que
that
amenazan a los sistemas democráticos,
are
incluyendo a Costa Rica, que ellos se derivan de la pobreza y las dificultades económicas. Si usted tendría algún comentario sobre eso, Jorge.
May I ask to summarize the question in English? I haven't quite got it.
Yes, the question it was basically a comment that the social violence and the drug cartels of which Jorge were speaking that threaten democratic systems, including Costa Rica, that it was a comment about the ways in which they stem from poverty and economic hardship, and would he maybe speak more to that?
You know, it looks like we've actually lost Jorge. I think his Zoom dropped. I don't see him on the Zoom anymore. So maybe we can keep going and come back to that.
Great, great. And we're still welcoming more questions, so please feel free to go to the Q&A and type your questions. So this goes to Amelia and Shirley. Do some of you speakers, presenters have podcasts available for nonprofit low-power radio rebroadcast and or internet sites to visit? Yes, Shirley, you can go, and then Amelia.
Yes, you know, I'm now being very challenged. I'll tell you why, because we teach podcasting, and we've really been focused on refugees and asylum seekers and the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. We're busy with episode 11. The 12th one will be published this year. But I think this is a topic that we can touch on perhaps in 2026, and then I'd be very happy to share it. Our episodes are about 25 to 30 minutes long, and they are shared on Podbean and various platforms.
So we're depending on World Beyond Borders, World Beyond War, to keep the movement connected and to share the work of Shirley when it comes out. Great. Amelia, go ahead.
Yeah, I put the link to Building Community Not Prisons, which is our coalition in the region Appalachia in the chat already. And then I'll also put in a project that I was involved in starting in 25 years ago almost, called Calls from Home. That is a radio show that airs on our local community radio station that connects people who have loved ones locked up in our prisons in our listening area with their families, so their families are able to stay connected through the radio. And that's been on the air for, 25 years at this point, and has expanded into some other forms of what we are calling restorative radio that addresses the prison industrial complex. So I put the link for that there as well. And I appreciate that question very much.
And there's a very interesting question also, also for you, Amelia. With so many universities graduating new classes of lawyers across the US, how do we keep all of these lawyers employed? Does this high population of lawyers increase the likelihood of the prison industrial complex expanding?
think that's a great question. And I can't, I mean, I think the fact of being a lawyer doesn't necessarily mean you're going to try to expand the prison industrial complex. In fact, we have a lot of amazing lawyers working on our side to try to resist that system, and really, fighting that structure. But as you clearly are gesturing towards, a lot of lawyers make their money by making sure people get locked up. And there's an enormous, enormous economy in that. And so I think there's just sort of some systemic shifts that might have to happen in the psychology of the United States population around what their values are. That would be the way to disrupt that, and also the kind of the ways that law schools are indoctrinating their students around what is or isn't the appropriate use of those professional skills.
Reem, may I add something to what I said?
Absolutely.
So thank you. You know, in South Africa, we've got refugees and asylum seekers from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Rwanda, from Burundi, from Sudan, from Ethiopia, Cameroon. It goes on and on. And, you know, I think this, the exodus of people is a result of war. And maybe we don't have to move away from refugees and asylum seekers, but it's the same community that can speak about the harms of war and ending war. Because if all war were to come to an end in their countries, they would be able to go home. And there's no peace yet. And so people are stuck in South Africa and many other countries, either in a tented community or like in South Africa, where they have to fend for themselves, competing with a local economy that is declining so rapidly that there's competition between locals and rising tensions. So I think I think this has been quite an eye-opening idea that we've been put here for a podcast or podcast series. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shirley and Amelia. I wanted to jump in with my own question for you, Shirley, if I can, which is I'm very fascinated by your body mapping project. I read a little bit about it online, and I was wondering if you could just speak about that project, that you've worked with apartheid survivors and in post-conflict areas, and just tell people about that and how that could possibly be a model for other areas.
Yes. You know, body mapping is a research methodology that I kind of took on as an oral historian and somebody who is a survivor, somebody who is classified as a victim of gross human rights violation in the South African context, because I was tortured and my baby was tortured. So we were flung headfirst into the movement of working with other survivors. And this is still our struggle today, by the way, the fight for reparations. And there was, you know, because of the deficit of education and the way in which people sacrificed their education and put the liberation first, and also never ever had the means to advance very far. I developed a way of working with people that was more familiar to them, that they were comfortable with. It wasn't automatically comfortable. So, for example, we can draw before we talk, actually, and we use colors before we even, and then we tap into those very early representations of the drawings that we drew as little children. And often I bring out clay, so elderly men who were looking after the livestock in the rural area and taking them down to the river would gather this clay at the river and make these most amazing cows, replicas out of this clay. And so working with materials that people were familiar with, we got that sort of life story told. And so I advanced it and advanced it. So it's not just about the body, it's about the life story that runs parallel around it. And you can see, if you go on to the website of the International Sites of Conscience, you'll be able to access it. And it's a fairly easy, if you follow it, you will be able to facilitate a workshop about for 5 days, no shorter than that, 5 full days, to enable people to tell their story in a life-size body map with their whole life story packed around it, from their name right to their visions for the future. And a very important exercise is, in fact, working with 2 people. So the other person that you work for is the shadow. And in the course of writing and talking about your story and drawing the drawings and then putting them on this big piece of material that is used in clothing factories, it's a hardy kind of cardboard to make patterns. And that's the material that we work with. And sorry, where was I going with that? I think I've lost my thread. Sorry. Oh, yes, the shadow. That all the time there are people that reach out in the most extraordinary way, even if we're feeling so desperate, so alone, so abandoned, in absolute hell. We begin to unpack our story. We begin to realize that, in fact, we have got people that have cared for us. And it's very good to acknowledge those people in your shadow. And at the end of the process, because there's also that positive element, people feel stronger about themselves. And they make a point of going back to those very people, a teacher or a neighbor or a relative, to thank them for the care that they had demonstrated. So it's a beautiful process. And if you need help, I'm always available to help. So it's gorgeous. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Yeah, I hope that we could possibly replicate that in other regions. And I'll pass it back to Reem.
Yeah, great. If there's a link to it somewhere, it would be great to put it in the chat box for people to look at it. So, Amelia, I'm back to you with more questions. So, someone asked, is there a list available of where all the copy cities are being built or already built? And also the use of military equipment being used in big cities by ICE. And they said that you refer to repatriation. Could you explain how that concept developed?
Yes. To the first question, I'm going to put in the chat a list of COP cities and a lot of different resources around understanding how COP cities are being built out and what their role is. And then repatriation is a concept in response to the theft of land by the settler colonialist project to bring back land into the hands of the indigenous communities from whom it was stolen, with the idea of, the matriarchal systems of care and nurturing that were disrupted by the settler colonialist project. So rematriating land is putting it back in the rightful hands of the people it was stolen from.
Great. And there's another question about the school system. So, and it's not only about the US, so Shirley, you can also answer it. So the question reads, is there a school system here in the US, or if not, in any other country, which has integrated an alternative to war curriculum? And how did they do that? So the second part of the question is, and who is using AI now to help develop more effective strategies and tactics? And also this person is from an organization called Get Courage Now. So they put their email in case if you want to, contact them for fundraising and nonviolent resistance work. So I'm happy to also put it in the chat box or for you to send to the speakers. So yeah, can we listen to you about, so it's basically two questions about the school system and developing an alternative to work curriculum, and also AI, like if there are any, who's using AI right now to develop more effective strategies and tactics. So Emilia, we can start with you and then go to Shirley.
I will be brief. I don't know anything about either of those questions, in all honesty. So, my apologies.
I think our curriculum falls way short. And, even in the way in which it properly, without any sanitizing, properly speaks of the past, there's a lot of work to be done. And so I think this is something that is one of the pillars of our work as the coalition, the education, research, and memorialization work of their but the bigger question is the longer problem of colonial slavery and genocide, which is not really the focus of the current work of, that's really the current focus of transitional justice. So we are constantly pulled in those directions of going further and deeper, and then grappling with the current. We've got incredibly high gender-based violence in the country. And so I think there is an attempt to look at self-defense, young girls being able to speak out, have the courage to speak out and defend themselves in ways if they are attacked. So, those are the kinds of things that are happening at schools. It's really a reactive response to a systemic problem of gender-based violence in our country. And I think that supersedes the sort of the bigger questions of an anti-war curriculum. It's really like dealing with masculinity, dealing with the power within the school system, in the family system, culturally, and in Africa, men have a very strong role and position in the family. So there's a lot of work there.
Thank you, Shirley. I mean, and just adding to what you're saying, some of the movement members have shared some resources in the chat box. So the Da Vinci Life Skills Curriculum, and then there is the Quaker and Mennonite schools, if I'm saying it correctly, and then the Waldorf Steiner schools. So there are some, I guess, some options or some things that we could build on, take advantage of, and really just, see what we can do with. And we continue adding. And I think this webinar today is part of the curriculum, I guess, So thank you so much. This was great. And I'm very sad that our friend Jorge was dropped off and he couldn't rejoin. Maybe it's a connection issue. And I think this is one of the, this is one of the problems we have many times webinars, and the connection is unstable in some countries. But this is great. I would like to thank you. And I think with what's happening right now in Sudan and my journey over the past 2.5 years, it has been really just demotivating. And there's a lot of feeling of loneliness, feeling that you're struggling, you and your people are struggling in kind of in a vacuum, and no one else is talking about it and no one is hearing you. But I think to come here and learn that there's so many possibilities and that there's so many people who are here not only showing solidarity, but are kind of giving us tools and terminologies. Emilia, thank you for mentioning a few things. to think about what we're going through and to think about what we can do, and I think I always have to say that it's collective. It's a movement, it's a local movement, it's a national movement, and it's a global movement. So we're all here together and small steps, small actions, but we will get there. I want to give Shirley and Amelia, I want to give you one final word. And just to say, something about your presence here, about being part of this movement, this international movement, and just one key highlight that you have learned from each other. So Shirley, if you can start.
Well, Amelia, I was detained in solitary confinement under the draconian apartheid laws. And I am a strong deponent of imprisonment and detention without trial, particularly of the torture techniques that some of these prisons are using. We should also put an end to inhumane ways of arresting people and chaining them to beds and punishing them for this and that. It's an incredibly harsh environment that doesn't change people's behavior in the least bit. It makes things worse and not better. It's counterintuitive in every respect. So it's been a pleasure to listen to you and meet you. And I encourage you to continue with the work that you're doing with love and solidarity from us in South Africa. Thank you to the members here who have asked good questions and have kept engaged. It's been encouraging as a panelist to have good attention and good questions. So I thank you, and thank you, Reem. I believe I've made a friend today for life. Yeah.
And I thank you, Shirley, for bringing forward the deep and intertwined links between the personal pieces that you have lived through and fought to create with the long structural arcs of political change and the ways that our personal acts are powerfully, powerfully meaningful in those larger political, glacial sometimes movements. And also very particularly the way that when you get a certain victory, it opens up a whole new terrain of work and struggle to have yet further better horizons, I guess I would say. And I really appreciate the way that you brought that into the work. And thank you so much to everyone who is here. I love how many people are here as part of this conversation, and I love being able to be here myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're ending. And thank you. And sorry that we took over the break, but we just had to keep going. So thank you again, and I wish you the best on the rest of the program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shirley. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Reem, for moderating. Thank you to Jorge, even though he's not here right now. And thank you to our incredible interpreters as well, David and Lex. Thank you for making this possible. So we will take a short break now for 15 minutes, and we will come back at 2:45 Eastern Time. Whatever time zone you're in, that's 15 minutes from now. So we're going to shut down this Zoom and then we will come back on the same Zoom link. So we'll see you all then. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.